Dr. Vinay Sahasrabuddhe ji. I invite him to deliver the speech.
The previous speaker to whom we just heard, a very erudite journalist, editor of the Organizer Weekly, and a good friend of mine, who is basically an academic and later on a journalist. I must call him Professor Prafulla Ketkar because that is his essential original identity. And whenever he speaks, I can say he speaks more like a professor because today's journalists, no disrespect to anybody, but rarely do engage themselves in some kind of a deep research, and therefore the profoundness with which Prafullaji speaks, it's something extraordinary. Prafullaji, Mr. Anuj, all other dignitaries present in the audience who come from various walks of life and together with the Amruta Mahotsava Samiti are celebrating the Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav through, as rightly described by Prafullaji, a kind of a churning, a synthesis of idea, a manthana, and this is really a very welcome way of observing the Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav. Let me at the outset thank the organizers for having me here, because Kozhikkode is in a way the cultural capital of the God's own country, Kerala, and therefore to come over here and to interact with all of you, it's certainly a matter of privilege and pleasure as well. The subject that has been suggested to me is Emerging India. And when I was just thinking about the very title of the subject, I thought that in the context of India, this state of emerging, it's something which is perennial, sanatana. India always emerges itself, emerges as a society, as a civilizational culture. And therefore I recall what the most scholarly governor that your state has got, Shri Arif Muhammad Khan, he once described that the civilizational culture of India, and in a very beautiful term he described, is ever aging, never old. So we are always an emerging nation that way. In Sanskrit, there is a beautiful term which we use commonly in Hindi and Marathi as well, which is Nitya Nutan Chirapuratana. We are always new and we are always eternal, Chirapuratana. We are always ancient. So this is the beauty of India. And when I say emerging India, it essentially refers to how together we have to ensure that the idea of India sustains. Idea of India remains intact. The idea of India continues to be a part of our national ethos. And in that context, I believe we can have a look at the surroundings, at all that is happening in our country and elsewhere in the world, and try to appreciate, try to understand India, the present day India, as emerging India. Let me start by sharing an incident which I came across some 7-8 years back when the Narendra Modi campaign, the first campaign, 2014, was at its peak. I was working for the party campaign, and in Mumbai, while we were interacting with some youth volunteers who were a part of our campaign, one of the 20-something lad while we were having a cup of coffee, he just, in a very upfront manner, very bluntly in a way, asked me a question. He said, "Sir, do you know what our generation wants?" Because we were working for Modi victory, and Modi victory was, and everybody was convinced that it will herald us to a new era as what has happened. But the question of the 20-something youth was a little blunt question. He asked me, "Sir, do you know what our generation wants?" I was a bit startled, but I said, "Yes, perhaps I know, because my son is almost of your age. But please tell me, what is the answer? What exactly your generation wants?" He said, "Simple hai, sir. We want 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I was perplexed. I said, "Please explain. What does that mean?" He said, "It's very clear. Our fundas are very clear." This is the lingo in which the younger generation speaks. He said, "Our fundas are very clear. We want 5-figure salary, 4-wheeler, 3-bedroom hall kitchen, 2 kids and 1 wife. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I was taken aback, but it was, and a bit amused also. Now there could be different ways of looking at this particular 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 phenomenon. And somebody told me, "Sir, it is not 5 anymore, it is 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I don't know, because people are not happy with 5-figure salary, they want 6-figure salary. Well, that can happen. Aspirations have only sky as the limit. But one may look at this particular response coming from a 20-something as very materialistic, very narrow-minded, very self-centered. And one may also look at it as the focused approach of the younger generation. At least they know where they want to go, whether rightly or wrongly, but they have some clarity in their minds. Perhaps I cannot say this about Praful's generation, because naturally there is a distance age-wise between both of us. But at least in my generation, when we were 20-something, we didn't have this much amount of clarity and precision and focus. We were confused. The emerging India is not confused. They know what is the idea of prosperity. They are unabashedly wanting to chase that dream of prosperous India, of which they themselves are also looking for prosperity, their own prosperity, and rightly so. So this is perhaps something that defines the essential characteristic of the young emerging India, that they know where they have to go. They are not shy of talking about prosperity and material kind of wellness, aggrandizement to a certain extent. People may have different opinion, but they know and they want to pursue that path. They know where they have to go. This is something very, very important, and in a way it tells us as to which direction the young emerging India wants to go. So there is a clarity of thought, and I believe this clarity of thought reflects in many more ways as well. For example, if we look at the national education policy, the new education policy, that is also very clear. I mean, I would say that the national education policy is the first significant departure from the Macaulayan thinking, and therefore, in a way, it is the manifesto of de-Macaulaization of our education. I mean, one wonders, immediately after independence, in fact, it was required that the nation thinks about a new education policy for an independent country. And there was so much for all of us to think about, and especially for the rulers of that time. Lokmanya Tilak talked about education. In fact, he, along with his very close friend, later on, of course, there were differences of opinion between them, but Gopal Ganesh Agarkar and Lokmanya Tilak, they established Deccan Education Society. They had some blueprint of what they called as Rashtriya Shikshan or nationalistic education. Mahatma Gandhi talked about basic education. Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar also wanted education to be taken to the students with some Indian spirit in it. He also established educational institutions. But with all these things at the backdrop, post-independence, governments didn't pay any serious attention to changing the content of education. So many committees and commissions were established. They gave a report, number of reports rather. It started with Kothari Commission. Then in the 90s, we saw the Ramamurthy Committee. And in between, again, several small and big committees also filed their reports. But nothing happened. In 1986, under Rajiv Gandhi, we had a new education policy, but it just changed the structure of education. It could not take us to the real core of Indian education, what we required for. Happily, the national education policy that the country adopted 2 years before talks us, and again, in very clear terms, that we want school children to be taking pride in their motherland, in their culture. Some kind of a rootedness, and it is the term that the policy document has used. A rootedness in the Indian culture is something which we definitely aim for. And therefore, this national education policy again reflects the requisite clarity that the emerging India wants. And there is a clarity now. There is nothing is vague about it. Our textbooks are undergoing sea change. The pattern of education, in the sense the unidimensionality of education is changing. It is becoming multi-dimensional. Our universities, already IIMs and IITs are enjoying a huge amount of autonomy, but many more institutions will also get some kind of an autonomy. So education is being taken to a different level to suit to the new and changing world order in a way. In the light of new technologies, again, we have to think about, and the national education policy tells us about that as well. So this clarity, this departure from a perennial kind of confused state, I think we have now given a farewell to all these things, and therefore we can certainly look forward to an emerging India wherein the new generation will be more rooted in our culture, in our ethos, in our national identity, something we should be happy about and satisfied as well. There are many issues which again I believe refer to this idea of emerging India. But essentially they are about three important things, and I am going to reflect mainly on them. This emerging India and the three dimensions of it, if I may put it that way, are about aspiring India, an assertive India, and an advancing India. All these three important dimensions are the important characteristics of the emerging India. And how? Let me give you some examples. Because as it happens, many times we also do not know as to what kind of changes are happening, because they are happening in multiple sectors, and newspapers do not bring all those changes to us because there are quote unquote interesting things for them to report to us, and these things unfortunately do not find any place in routine mainstream media, but they are important and we need to know about them. There was a reference in Prafullaji's speech to how India had successfully made an impact through its vaccine diplomacy. But when I say aspiring India, it is not just that. Today, India is leading most developing countries in seeking further democratization of the United Nations systems. And not just United Nations, but entire global governance requires to be democratized. And rightly so. Our Prime Minister has been insisting on this, that India is not just the largest democracy and the most successful democracy, because save for the 19 months of emergency, the draconian rule imposed by Mrs. Gandhi, we have continued with parliamentary democracy. This is not the case in many other countries that got their freedom almost at the same time when we became an independent country. So India is not just the successful and the largest democracy, but India is also the mother of democracy in the context of the origin of democratic thought. And Prafullaji referred to a coinage which I believe people like you would also agree with, which is spiritual democracy, which means ekam sat vipra bahuda vadanti, and rejecting any kind of monopolistic approach. This is what? This is essentially democratic. People think about individualism and collectivism and the conflict in it. Yes, there is a conflict, but India has found its way. In several other foreign languages, our individual family relationships have been given some kind of a hold all generic name. There are aunts and uncles, not in Indian languages. We have masis and chachis. We have chachas and mamas. Why? Because we respect every individual relationship. But at the same time, that relationship is in the context of our family, which is the importance of collectivism as well. This is our approach and something which is the most democratic approach. Like United Nations reforms, Prime Minister Modi, when he addressed the United Nations General Assembly for the first time in 2014, he said that I am addressing the United Nations General Assembly for the first time and I am new to the international politics. So I find that there are several groupings which are named as G7, G20, G70, G this, G that. And then he said, but I wonder why there cannot be a group on the humanitarian issues about which there is no difference of opinion, and then that group could be G all. This is our idea of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. So we are an aspiring India and we want to spread the message of India, the message that emanates from the idea of India to the global community without being shy about it. I'll give you one example. Earlier, when it came to our relationship with Israel and Palestine, our previous rulers always wanted to do some kind of a balancing trick. And they were under some pressure kind of, that if we displease Palestine, what our Indian Muslims will think about it. I mean, that was the reason why our governments did not take interest previously in evolving a strong relationship, a bilateral relationship with Israel, but not with the present dispensation. Here is a prime minister who visits Israel and within just 2-3 months interval also goes and talks to the Palestinian leaders there. So we don't want our foreign relations also to be influenced by the vote bank politics. Not required. We are an aspiring country and we would like to influence the global politics. Take the example of climate change. The 2017 Paris talks, Indian performance was something very remarkable because we in a way gave voice to all the developing countries who unfortunately were at the receiving end. I mean the damage to the climate was coming, and today also it comes majorly from developed and ultra developed countries. And the punishment is delivered to the developing countries or undeveloped countries. Why? So India gave a voice, and India's voice was heard because in a way India led the entire community of developing nations and aspiring India, as I said. Recently, just about 3-4 months before, when the United Nations decided to observe, I don't know which day exactly, but I think it was 23rd March or something, as anti-Islamophobia day kind of. India opposed and said, why only is anti-Islamophobia? The United Nations should be against all kinds of phobia. So it should be anti-religiophobia day. Why just Islamophobia? There is a Hindu phobia, there is a Christian phobia, there is a Jew phobia. Why just Islamophobia? We should be against all kinds of phobia. Never in the past India had gave voice to its considered opinion on such issues at the international fora. But today we are doing it because we are an aspiring country, and that is one of the characteristics of this emerging India. We are also trying to assert in our own way. We know what happened during the Balakot surgical strike in 2019. Never in the past India had retaliated in a very forceful manner, in a very determined fashion. Earlier, when some of the terrorists did certain violent attacks in Manipur and then took shelter in what is called as Myanmar or Burma, again at that point of time also Indian troops chased them and destroyed their establishment in the jungles of Myanmar on the border of India and Myanmar. Tit for tat. हिंदी में हम कहते हैं कि हम किसी को छेड़ेंगे नहीं, मगर हमें कोई छेड़ता है तो उसको छोड़ेंगे नहीं. We will not try to usurp or try to encroach, but if somebody tries to encroach, we will not sit pretty. We will settle the score. This is an assertive India. So this is something which as students of political science as well and as students of the emerging India, all of us require to understand. Same thing happened when China indulged in some kind of misadventure in Galwan. There also we held our position firmly and strongly, and we didn't budge. And it was later on for China, in a way, to backtrack. Immediately after coming to power in 2019, for the first time, the central government decided to do away with a constitutional aberration in the light of the guiding principles of our constitution, which was removing Article 370. Something, again, a reflection of assertive India. Then came the CAA, that is also another reflection of an assertive India. Why should we allow all kinds of infiltrators to take shelter over here? Those who are at the receiving end of religious persecution should be given more preference, and rightly so. We tried to short circuit the period. 12 years they have to wait to seek citizenship. Now it has been short circuited, and those minorities, especially in other countries, are given shelter in a shorter span of time. Again, an assertive India. Take the case of our import-export policies. The dependence on foreign countries and especially foreign-made goods. Prime Minister gave a call for Atmanirbhar Bharat. I mean, something which perhaps the country should have thought right after the independence. But the backlog was not cleared. And therefore, taking advantage of the atmosphere in the country during the onset of the COVID-19, Prime Minister made a passionate appeal for Atmanirbhar Bharat. And today we see, I mean, such a small thing like toys. Needlessly, we used to import a huge amount of toys from our northern neighbor and other countries also. Today, that has become a thing of the past. Our indigenous toy makers were promoted, encouraged, and today Indian toy market is largely that of Indian toys, not imported toys. Small thing that way, but with a very powerful message for everybody. So this assertive India is again, I believe, an important characteristic of the emerging India. There is also an advancing India, advancement in the context of our progress. Let us take the example of recently held Commonwealth Games and the very remarkable performance of Indian sportspersons. Today we have a well-defined sports policy. In fact, Prime Minister and the present establishment have been very strongly pleading with the state governments to create some kind of a database of sport fields that are available in every state, because mindless urbanization is inflicting upon the available spaces for sports and sports activities. So the government is taking care of every other obstacle in our path of evolving a very strong sports culture. Not only that, the present government has, again, I must say that perhaps for the first time after independence, put special emphasis on indigenous sports. Kalaripattu, how do you pronounce it? Kalaripattu. Something, such a precious traditional knowledge that our previous generations handed over to us. Is it not our responsibility to preserve it, and not just preserve it, but cultivate it further and hand it over to the younger generation as well? Today there is an avowed policy of the government to promote our indigenous sports. Again, we are emerging as an important startup nation. I am sure you people must have heard about the unicorns and their significant number. And India is now a home to hundreds of unicorns. Something very, very remarkable. Earlier this was not the case. The successful fight against the COVID-19, again, I need not very elaborately tell you all these things because they are a part of common knowledge, including the vaccine policy. So India is trying to make deeper inroads as knowledge society in multiple areas, whether it is space science, whether it is health science. Take the small example. For the first time, I mean, never in the past, the central government, the union government took keen interest in having the artifacts, Indian artifacts, stolen by different people and kept in different countries. An assertive India said, no, no, they are Indian and we want them back. And if you compare the statistics of such stolen artifacts that were brought in India, back in India, before 2014, I believe during the last 7-8 years, the number is more than whatever was done before 2014. When there is a resoluteness, when there is a political will, and as I said, an assertive India manifests in different ways, and this is one such example. So, emerging India is about aspiring India, is about, as I said, advancing India, and is also about India that is asserting its strength, something very, very important. But that doesn't mean that everything is hunky-dory and we can sit pretty and simply watch all that is happening. I believe as citizens, we have to be conscious about the changes that are happening and take control of them and try to shape them in the light of the idea of India. Because when I say emerging India, and at the beginning of my presentation I said that India is an ever emerging country, kind of. Nitya Nutan Chirapuratan. So, in a way, this is an occasion, the Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav is an occasion to revisit the core of the idea of India. And what is that? There are at least 5 things. One of which was referred to by Praful Ketkar, so I need not elaborate on this, but it is about spiritual democracy, about Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. Globally, many countries are struggling with multiculturalism. In UK, I was told that there are certain areas where the British, whatever their written, unwritten constitution, is not effective. There is a Sharia law there. There are hamlets, there are pockets. In UK, where Sharia law is made applicable and not the British law, and the British government finds itself as helpless. They cannot do anything. We cannot allow this to happen. And therefore, we should be, in fact, in the days to come, as a student of international relations, it certainly comes to my mind that perhaps India is more well positioned to talk about spiritual democracy, which is a more profound concept than multiculturalism. But with a rider. Because when we say Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti, that is the fundamental statement of accommodative spirit of accommodation. We don't discriminate, fine. But what do we do when some people refuse to get accommodated? Some people take a position which goes against the very spirit of accommodation. I believe those who refuse to get accommodated certainly cannot be accommodated, and for that we require a more stern constitutional approach. But yes, one of the fundamental features of the idea of India is Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti, the spiritual democracy. The second important feature is about diversity and unity. We colloquially keep on saying unity in diversity. But in fact, it is diversity in our unity. We are first united, and that unity is manifested in diverse fashion, which is why diversity. But essentially we are one. Not that we are diverse and therefore we are one. It is other way around. We are one and that oneness is manifested in diverse ways, which is the diversity. I'll give you one example. In several languages in India that we speak, whether Marathi, Gujarati, Assamese, Malayalam, there are common, there are sayings and proverbs which have common meaning. Now, how this commonality of our proverbs and sayings has occurred? It is not because of some department of languages sitting in Delhi that they issued a GR, as what they call, and asked all the language departments in different states to coin similar kind of proverbs and sayings. No. They are common because our thinking is common. In Hindi they say, Nach na aaye angan tedha. In Marathi also we say, Nachta yaina angan vakde. I am sure in Malayalam also there could be some saying which tells us about the fashion of using some kind of an alibi to hide your inability. So things are there. And therefore, diversity, which is the diverse manifestation of our innate unity. The third is our idea of confluence with Mother Nature. Today the global community is talking about sustainability. But is it not the fact that our culture has taught us the fundamentals of sustainability since times immemorial? In our country, there are people, and I am sure even in Kerala, who start their day by offering or rather seeking forgiveness of Mother Earth. Padasparsham kshamasvame. Why? We respect Mother Earth and therefore there is no question of conquering nature. It is confluence with Mother Nature. Today they talk about sustainability. We know it. We knew it maybe millennia before. So this is the third important cornerstone of our idea of India. The fourth is our way of overcoming the binaries of capitalism and socialism. We have our thought of Antyodaya. Mahatma Gandhi, Pandit Deendayal Upadhyay, many have talked about Antyodaya. Antyodaya is recognizing that the most deprived is the most deserved when it comes to the distribution of the fruits of development. So naturally there is social justice, there is economic justice, every kind of justice is inherent to the idea of Antyodaya. We need not quarrel about capitalism and socialism. Both have some merits, but both have some demerits. And therefore our way of Antyodaya. And lastly, our idea of world is one family. This Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam essentially comes from our thinking about the entire universe for that matter. And therefore we easily relate with each other. That oneness of humanity, such a great idea. I mean, scores of examples could be given how our culture has influenced people. To a very great extent, ICCR organizes Ramayana festival every year after 2014 essentially. And we invite troops coming from Malaysia, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Myanmar. So once our office wrote to the government of Brunei. So there was a discussion in the office whether Brunei will send a troop or not, because Brunei, unlike Indonesia and Malaysia, is a 100% Islamic country. Everybody there is the follower of Islam. So how will they send a troop for Ramayana? People wondered. But much to our surprise and happiness, there was a group of brilliant dancers coming from Brunei and they presented a skit based on Ramayana. Very colorful. Later on, while talking to the artist over a cup of tea, one of our officials shared with them that we were apprehensive whether Brunei government will send a troop or not. The principal artist of that group responded saying that, sir, you are committing a mistake. We have changed our religion, not our culture. This is the strength of Ramayana. This is the strength of idea of India. When the president of Iran visited India in 2018, he told Prime Minister Narendra Modi that Maharshi Panini is the civilizational linkage between India and Iran, because Panini is the grammarian who created the linguistic structure of Persian language. And Panini also created the linguistic structure of Sanskrit, a great grammarian. So we should be doing something. And therefore, ICCR organized a international conference on the contribution of Panini as a grammarian in Tehran. The University of Tehran organized it. We had taken a delegation from India, and several other people also joined from different countries. I went there for inauguration, and the Vice Chancellor of Tehran University took me around, and in our conversation he told me, or rather asked me, that in Tehran University we teach Upanishad. Tell me in India which universities teach Upanishad. I had no immediate answer to give him. This is the strength of our culture. This is the strength of idea of India. And therefore we need to realize first of all this. And while our nation is certainly, as I said, there are challenges galore. We have to overcome the economic disparity. We have to overcome the challenges that are in a way harming our social structure. The caste identity, smaller identities, impacting negatively on our national identity. The kind of Revdi politics the Prime Minister has been referring to it. And how do we deal with it? It is hampering the very democracy of our country. So challenges are there. New technologies. The artificial intelligence, augmented reality, virtual reality, social media. There are some merits, but there are some demerits also. There are some challenges also. Many new startups are coming in, edtech, fintech. I am told that there is a Nigerian startup, Brickfly, and they are using plastic to create bricks. So, while new technologies definitely, as I said, they pose some challenges, but there are some good things about them as well. And we need to look at this positive aspect of it and try to have a grip over the wave of new technologies. All kinds of new and very brilliant ideas are coming to the fore. Again, there is a startup called Godbag, G-O-T-B-A-G. And you know what this startup is about? This startup has started again by some youths from different countries. They have come together thanks to new technologies. And some 15,000 fishermen from several countries also have come together, and they collect the plastic that we see floating in our oceans and seas. And they collect it and recycle it and create our shoulder bags. Backpacks, as what they call. So things are happening. And the new generation is very positive, very concerned, and very imaginatively and creatively dealing with these challenges. But in a situation like this, I believe the responsibility on all of us who want to ensure that we enter into this new emerging India with renewed confidence also have to understand the importance of Swa, about which I am sure yesterday Nanda Kumarji has very elaborately talked about. And you know, the the continuation of this particular thought process. Mahatma Gandhi, in his Hind Swaraj, very beautifully put it. Gandhiji says, and I quote, "My Swaraj is to keep the genius of our civilization intact. I want to write many new things, but they must all be written on an Indian slate. I would gladly borrow from the West when I can return the amount with decent interest." Unquote. This is what we have to strive for. We are not opposed to everything that is coming from abroad, from different countries. But we have to protect the idea of Swa, which is an important ingredient of Swadhinata, Ajadi, Swaraj. And therefore, for that, we will have to take a comprehensive view of our civilizational journey. Pandit Dindayal Upadhyay beautifully put it, from the past through the present to the future. It's a continuous flow, and therefore, we cannot break from the past. We cannot simply think about the present, and we also cannot be delinking the past and present from the future. We have to be conscious of this and work towards this emerging India and try to ensure that this emerging India is brighter than what it is today. It is always said that every generation has to ensure that they pass on this beautiful universe to the next generation, which is better than what was or what is today. I don't know how many of us will really be able to do that, but we have to strive for that, because there lies the importance of emerging India. Before I conclude, let me tell you that this importance of Swa, again, it's so very critical, so very fundamental, that even a journalist writer who can be described as someone who has very deeply studied Indian culture and tried to understand it, even though he belonged to UK, a British journalist about whom all of us know because of his writings, Mark Tully. Tully writes, and I quote, "The characteristic genius of the Indian mind is not to shake the belief of the common man, but to lead them by stages to the understanding of the deeper philosophical meanings behind their beliefs. But the Western world and the Indian elite who emulate it ignore the genius of the Indian mind. They want to write a full stop in a land where there are no full stops." This is something for all of us to think about and work for. Thank you very much.